And some of the ones that were never found would have an explanation. But then you're left with another big chunk for which there is no explanation. And what happens, of course, is that, again, it's about public perception. People generally perceive the number of children that go missing in the world by the number of missing children stories they see on the news. And, of course, that's few. But the numbers, in fact, are absolutely astronomical. I mean, you mentioned Africa. Craig Mutchell was telling me years ago about the number of children that just went missing in Africa. And it's happening all over the world. And, you know, I do go into this in the book. I mean, it's 700 pages. I go into many things, but they all connect. And there's no doubt that a lot of these children not just end up in paedophile rings and satanic rings and are, you know, killed and disposed of. You know, this people new to this will find this like staggering, but they're also used as food for these reptilian entities. I mean, I came across this years and years ago, and because when these entities operate outside of this reality, they feed off human energy in its energetic form. When they come into this reality, they can only stay for so long because there's a vibrational incompatibility. The way they stay for longer is trying to improve that vibrational compatibility by drinking human blood, which carries the human genetic code. And that helps them vibrationally stay in sync more than they would if they didn't drink human blood. This is one of the key reasons why blood drinking is absolutely rife throughout the Illuminati bloodlines. And they also consume children. They eat children, they do. And there was a series on British television on the BBC. What was it called? Torchwood? Is it Torchwood they call it? And I saw this one series. I didn't see any of the others. I saw this one series. And whoever wrote it either knows what's going on or got real lucky in it with his imagination. I'm not saying which it is because I don't know. But one of those two happens to be true. And it was that this extraterrestrial race had contacted the world governments, British government, American government, and said that they would cause devastation, in effect, if they were not given what they wanted. And what they wanted was 10% of the world's children, something like that. And so these extraterrestrials then arrived, not in a ship, but in an energetic flash out of another dimension. And what they'd said was that before they came, there had to be a special tank built with which, to keep it simple, had a particular atmosphere within it, which they could cope with because they couldn't cope with our atmosphere. So they crash into this dimension in a great flash over London, and they come into this tank where they manifest as kind of physical, but you never did really see them, but they had a major, major reptilian feel about them when you saw them in silhouette and all the rest of it. And then the governments start orchestrating situations where schools have to send their children to certain centres, and they gave another reason for it. And eventually the whole thing is exposed and it doesn't happen, which is what happens in these stories. But in effect, what the governments were doing was trying to manipulate the situation by explaining it away in other ways to get 10% of the world's children for these entities. Now, that is what is happening all over the world. Children are being taken for these entities. And not only that, going back to how we started this conversation, a lot of the genetic manipulation of humanity, I would say the overwhelming majority of it takes place in the moon, because the moon is well, it's 2,000 miles round, and of course it has an enormous outer shell, which actually two scientists from the Russian Academy of Sciences came out in the 70s. They wrote an article, a joint article, in which they said that they believed that the moon was artificial, and they explained how it was constructed. And through explaining that, they explained away so many of the apparent anomalies of the moon. It was brilliant. And of course they were ignored, but they were right. And within it, it's just an enormous, part of it are enormous genetic laboratories. Because they don't just do this, around the Earth or to the Earth. They do it all over the bloody place. It's a modus operandi, as I said earlier. We're just seeing our version of it. And a lot of the children, I think, end up there. And I think a lot of the abductees who talk about being taken away in spaceships and ended up in laboratories, I think if they really knew, they'd be in the moon. And that's where all the genetic stuff really goes on. And then it gets delivered back to the Earth to be implanted here. And I think a lot of children end up there. Certainly a lot of children end up in the underground bases, because people there have spoken out over the years and said that.
Yeah, about the cages full of children and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this starts to explain what we're talking about, which is why extraordinary numbers of children go missing every year, all over the world.
It's interesting. You see a lot of correlations between things that are going on in Hollywood and whatnot, and little bits and pieces come out. Maybe it's to familiarize people or get them not to feel so strange about the agenda when it starts to come through, or perhaps it's even just to give them ammunition to say, you've seen that on TV, mate. That's complete bullshit or a fiction. But I was watching a silly little film the other day, and it's about the Greek gods being real, and this boy growing up, and he realizes that he's a demigod, and he goes to this camp where they're training the demigods. And one of the guys is saying, you'd be surprised how many people on Earth are demigods. And, some of the professional athletes, he says, it goes right up to the White House. And I thought, boy, what a nice little clue that was.
Yeah, they're telling us things all the time. Sometimes you're right. Its main motivation is to put it out there as a fiction, so that when people say actually it's fact, they go, you've just been watching that movie and all that stuff. It's a load of rubbish, but it's just a film. But in another way, they're kind of feeding us subliminal stuff all the time. I mean, when I first started coming out with the reptilian thing, and I brought that to my conscious mind, you suddenly start realizing the bloody reptilian symbolism, the reptilian input into children's entertainment, and the reptilian stuff all over the city of London, which is one of the heart centres, of course, of the global web. And you see it all around you. It's interesting, they've just found, this is really profound to me, something that really symbolises what's going on at the moment. They've just found a portrait of Queen Elizabeth I. And it's reached the point where the paint has gone away enough for them to see what is behind the paint, and to realise that when the portrait was originally painted, she wasn't holding a bunch of flowers, which she is in the one that was painted over. She's holding a snake. And when I saw that, I mean, that is so symbolic that in this time of the great revealing, the time when all that's remained hidden is being brought to the surface by the truth vibrations. That little cameo is so symbolic. At this time, the paint has come away enough to see the snake, the serpent, behind the mask of the bunch of flowers. I thought that was very, very profound, because everything is an expression of everything else, and profound truths, macrocosm truths, come out in microcosm situations, because not least because this reality is holographic.